Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the National Humanities Center Humanities in Class webinar series. Tonight's session is titled TESS, Teaching Ethics with Short Stories, and I'm joined by Luc Bovens from the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. My name is Andy Mink. I'm the Vice President for Education Programs. I want to welcome you to tonight's session. As you may recall, the last time we had intended to have this session, there were severe and very disruptive storms in the Triangle area of North Carolina. So both Luke, just down the street from me, and myself were worried about power and internet, so we rescheduled for tonight. And now, of course, we've got the shadow of the coronavirus that's overseeing us all. I know it's not trivial at all for you to be working with young people every day, trying to help them explain what's going on, help them grapple with their anxieties or things they might be worried about. I hope everything is well with all of your schools and your districts and your students. You may have been a part of our last webinar. We had a pop-up webinar last Wednesday night with Mary Wabel from the University of Pittsburgh, in which we contextualized the coronavirus by discussing epidemics from the past. And if you'd like to see that, the recording is now live, and I'd encourage you to take a look so you can just have some sense of how to better understand what's happening in the world around us from the point of view of a humanist or an historian. I also want to thank Libby and Mike, as always, for the hard work they do on our team. Please do reach out to us and be in touch either by email or through Twitter if you've got suggestions and thoughts and ways that we can help you with the good work that you're doing. National Humanities Center is not outside of the coronavirus scare. As a matter of fact, North Carolina is currently in a state of emergency. The center, which is home to an annual cohort of about 35 fellows, is also right now sort of wondering what the next steps might be. We've got folks from universities all over the country who are watching with some anxiety what's happening back home and with their students and their families. I don't think this will disrupt our webinar series in the least. In fact, our online portfolio of work is probably only going to be more relevant and more accessible to you, so I'd encourage you to take a look at that. That includes going to our website. Our website has been designed in the last 6 months to index and put together all of the content that we create at the center. That includes the education materials as well as our scholarly programs. And if you go to our website, humanitiescenter.org, you can, by using the search function, find other materials, sessions, webinars, recordings, podcasts that may be relevant if you've got an interest in tonight's session. For example, if you go to our searchable index and type in philosophy or philosophy with children, you might be interested in this podcast that we created with Michael Burrows from the Kegley Center at Cal State Bakersfield, and Allison Cohen, who is an advanced placement teacher at Langley High School in McLean, Virginia. These are the kinds of materials that we hope are helpful as you explore not just the content, but the process by which humanists do their work. A couple of quick announcements before we begin tonight. We are about to open our application process for the 2020-21 Teacher Advisory Council. I see Carl Rosen, who's a past member of the TAC and located just outside of Philadelphia, is with us tonight. It's really important for us to work closely with teachers who are in the classroom and identify the needs and the gaps that you might be facing. If you do apply for and are chosen to join this cohort, we will bring you to North Carolina to the center for a 2-day summit in early October. And you'll have a chance to meet everybody and to see exactly how the center runs and the kinds of things that we like you to advocate for us. Again, these applications open on March 13th and are due by the beginning of May, and we'll make announcements of next year's cohort by Memorial Day. I also want to mention that our online course catalog is currently moving at full steam. We've got 5 courses right now that have been launched and are currently in place. We'll be scheduling 3 new courses, additional courses, to open on May the 26th. That means that these courses are now accepting registration. All of our courses are approved for professional development hours. That includes in places like Los Angeles Unified. Our courses are pre-approved for 1 salary point. So you can take 5 webinars, join us for 5 webinars, or take 1 online course, and you get that magical salary point that is so important for you to have. So take a look at our website and sign up for any of the courses that you might find interesting. Again, every fall, every spring, every summer, we'll have a new slate of courses that are scheduled, and we can work with you to make them fit your schedule. Thirdly, I'd like to re-announce or mention again the Beyond February 5-day Summer Institute that we have scheduled for late June. This will be an opportunity for teachers to work closely with scholars and performance artists, and in particular, A.D. Carson, on the ways in which hip hop can access the African American experience. The session is limited to 36 participants. We're probably about 75% full right now. I'd encourage you, if you're interested, to go to the registration page and check out more of the details. That includes the scholarships that we do have available. We've worked over the last month or so to secure scholarships that serve different areas of the country. I do anticipate adding additional scholarships over the next couple of weeks, but right now we have some scholarships that are available for teachers in the District of Columbia, teachers in the District of Philadelphia, Decatur Public Schools, which is AD's hometown, Charlottesville City Schools, Los Angeles Unified, and Charlotte Mecklenburg. So if you're a teacher in any of those districts, you are eligible for a full award to attend this institute and come to the center this June. Finally, we do have a scholarship that the National Humanities Center has funded for an early career teacher in North Carolina. So that would be years 1 through 3. If you or any of your colleagues or other folks in your department at your school fall into that early bandwidth of your career, we'd love to have you come and join as well. Finally, in terms of reminders for tonight, while you hear my voice and you'll continue to do so as the moderator, Luc is going to lead a really compelling topic tonight and share his expertise through the PowerPoint that he's developed. It really is your participation that makes this webinar an interactive and an engaging session. So please do use the chat box, just like Marisol and Napoleon have, and ask questions, respond to thoughts that we have, share URLs, let us know what you think about what we're saying. And it's in that chat box that I'll be moderating and bringing questions forth. Luc might be keeping his eye on it as well, but if not, I'll ask the question that you need to ask him, and we'll get your questions answered. So this is all an introduction to bring our lead scholar to the microphone tonight. Luc, if you'll give me a minute, I'm gonna, let's see, there's Luc. I almost invited Lucy Cohen to speak, so I'm gonna mute Lucy Cohen. Luc, your microphone should be on. Are you with us here in Chapel Hill?
I hope so. Can you hear me?
You are. Thank you. I can. Thank you. Luc, you sound fantastic, and I appreciate you joining. Again, this was a rescheduled session, so you've been really flexible and patient with us. That's a mark of a good educator. And in a moment, I'm going to give you the mouse, and you can advance the slides at your own pace. But if you don't mind, I'd like to actually start with a question and put you on the spot just a little bit, because we've got teachers who are in the room. They're teachers of young people of all ages, and at least a few of them are going to talk to colleagues tomorrow morning, explain what they've done tonight. They're going to talk to parents. They might even talk to some kids. And someone is going to say to them, little kids can't do, young kids can't do philosophy. How do you respond to that? Is there a sort of an age limit of when developmentally we can do philosophy?
Oh, I think you could do philosophy with very young children. Yeah, I was just actually reading a short story that was really geared towards very young children. And there's all this stuff with with genetic engineering that there's sort of a question as to, is something an enhancement, or is it just correcting for diseases and things like that. So in this particular story, this was actually a story in after dinner conversations, which is very interesting project. You have a person who finds a bunch of old dolls, right? And the person says, well, I can fix you, right? And so there's the bear who says, oh, my eyes need to be fixed and this and that. And the person says, yeah, I'll do that for you. But then at a certain point, the unicorn says, I don't really feel like I fit in society. So could you take my horn off so that I'm just like an ordinary horse, right? And so you get this whole sort of exchange going, and I think you get the kids worried about the fact that well, it's okay to say, fix my eye, right? But it's not okay for the unicorn to say, make me into another kind of being. Yeah.
Mhm. Right, right.
And that, of course, is really sort of what underlies this whole debate in bioethics on genetic engineering. Yeah, is something like is something an enhancement? Is it a correction, or is it, to what extent is it permissible to do genetic engineering exercises? And exactly that sort of story was taken up in this children's story about, you know, dolls or various stuffed animals and so on, who ask a person to fix them, right? And the
Mhm.
question is sort of, should you fix them or shouldn't you fix them? I mean, is this a valid request or is it not? And I thought, that's a story that you can do with 7 or 8 year olds,
Sure.
and get their reaction to it.
And it sounds like that. And by the way, that was the perfect philosopher answer. And I appreciate that. But it sounds like you're also suggesting that there is an innate sort of appetite and ability and sort of way of thinking that is philosophical and ethical that even the youngest of students can grapple with if put in the right context, in the right frame.
Yeah, I think so. I remember, as a 10-year-old, I asked my mom, I said, it's kind of strange. I said, suppose that every time I see green, I actually have the experience of red, as you would have the experience of red. And when there is red, I have the experience of green. Yeah. And so it would all be inverted in a way. I didn't say it like that as a 10-year-old. I said, we would never know. We would never know that we see things differently. And my mom said, "Well, that's silly. That's just silly, right?" But later on, as a philosopher, I recognized this is the inverted spectrum problem.
Right.
And so I think, young kids actually do ask philosophical questions. I think Alice in Wonderland is full of philosophical questions. It's written by a philosopher, and he makes these philosophical questions in a way, into playful stories that you can tell to young children. So no, I don't think there is an age limit. As soon as there is, the dawning of reason, we can do philosophy.
Ah, that's fantastic. Thank you for that introduction. I think it's a wonderful way to sort of set the tone for what we're doing tonight, and ultimately for the folks in the audience to be able to take many of the examples you share and your own journey in creating tests and ways that they can use it with the students that they work with. Luke, I've given you the mouse, so you should be able to advance the slides at your own pace,
Oh yeah,
and we are
excellent.
anxious to
Thank
hear
you
your
very
story.
much. All right, let me try. Great. Okay. Well, welcome to everyone. So it's interesting that, a storm can disturb the webinar, but the coronavirus can't. So it's terrific to have you all in the house, and so many conferences around the country are being canceled, but our webinar is happening. So that's fantastic. Welcome to all of you. So here's what I would like to do with you. So I have this project teaching ethics with short stories, and I hope you had a chance to at least, take a glimpse at the website. And I want to tell you a little bit about where this all came from, how it came about. It really has been a bit of a labor of love, and it's gone through various installments. So I'll tell you a little bit about how I came to constructing this website. Then I'll tell you a little bit about the structure of the website, what's so good about using short stories in teaching ethics. Then I'd like to look at a particular short story that was written by a Swedish author, To Kill a Child, and that'll also give you an example of how the whole thing works and what you can do with this website. And then we'll talk a bit about the challenge in trying to reach an audience and really clearing copyright on these issues. I mean, it sounds like it's going to be boring, talking about copyright and all of that. But as somebody who's trying to put out a website like this and is trying to reach an audience, it really has been a bit of a challenge. And maybe you have ideas to help me out there. And then we can talk a bit about improvements. So let me start with the history here, going back many, many years when I first started thinking about this. So over the years, I've been teaching philosophy in CU at Boulder in the London School of Economics, and now I'm in UNC at Chapel Hill. And I teach various courses in moral and political philosophy. I teach contemporary social problems. And all through the years, I thought it was interesting to use little movie clips, to use short stories, to use articles from the popular press and various web sources and so on in order to get a conversation started with my students. And so I was thinking to myself, maybe I can do something more with this. And I've always thought, for many years, I've been thinking that it would be nice to make a website in which I would bring together a number of short stories that exemplify particular pertinent social problems and then connect it up with articles in the popular press and so on. And so, as luck would have it, about 10 years ago, I was teaching in the London School of Economics, and I had a German and a Bulgarian undergraduate who knocked on my door and they said, we want to do summer research for you. I thought, well, what are we going to do, right? I mean, do I have a project for you? So I told them about this idea of putting together a website on short stories. And next door, there was actually the European Institute in the LSE. They were interested in this as well. And we thought we would put a project together that had the following structure. So we'd say for every country in the European Union, as you see, the United Kingdom is still in there. We should take it out now, but at that time it was still in there. So for every country in the European Union, we would have one short story, yeah, and we have a little bit of a commentary. And the idea is that all of this would put together some sort of moral vision for Europe. And we sort of talked the talk, and it all sounded pretty good. But frankly, we worked on this for a while, and we had a good time. We learned something, we had fun doing it, but it really was a disaster. Why was it a disaster? Well, various reasons. At one point, I remember my student called me from the British Library, because the British Library is just next door. And she said, I can't find a single story from Malta that is worth reading. Well, actually, she used more colorful language than that. But the problem was, of course, that these literary traditions were just too restrictive in order to get something worthwhile together on a website. Another problem was that this idea of a moral vision for Europe, that seems to be pie in the sky. I didn't see that going anywhere. And that should be presented through literature and through short stories. That was hopeless. And then to think that somebody in Croatia was going to be interested in reading a Danish short story in high school. Anyway, this was hopeless. And so Samuel Beckett came to mind. That is, try again, fail better. Yeah, so how can we do better than this? And the next idea really that we had was, see, my students were a bit of jet setters, and they never quite believed in this, very, European Union focused project. They wanted to do something that was much more global than the kind of thing that I had in mind. But now it's interesting when you actually look at high school curricula. I grew up in Belgium, in the northern part of Belgium, so Dutch is my mother tongue. And so we read so much literature in high school, all from the Low Countries. Yeah. And now, of course, you see exactly the same if you go on the website for, what is the canon for literature teaching in US high schools. Here are 6 authors. And of course, they're all American authors. They're all US-based authors. There's a little bit of Shakespeare and William Golding, so back to England there, but that's about the furthest that we stretch when it comes to the canon in teaching literature in US high schools. And the same was true really, when I was taking literature in my Belgian high school, right? So now I think there's nothing wrong with that in a way, because I'm teaching in North Carolina now, and I have many students who come in and they're really crazy about William Faulkner, and sort of to have this kind of regional literary interest, I think, is a good thing. You want to know about the authors in your own region. You want to know about your national authors, or you want to know about the authors in your linguistic community. But at the same time, I remember that when I was in my early 20s, I had some lefty friends in university, and they all were telling me, man, you got to read Gabriel Garcia Marquez. It is fantastic, and so on, right? I was a bit skeptical, but I picked up 100 Years of Solitude, and I felt after a couple of pages that a whole new world had opened up for me. Um, Not just in the way of content material, but also stylistically. This was sort of something that was so radically different, and I was just so excited about it. And so I think that the idea of coming up with a collection of short stories from around the world, in which the various regions around the world are properly represented by prominent authors, would be an interesting thing to do for high school teaching. And so that's really what we worked on. We forgot about the European Union project, and we said, let's try to get around the world, and let's try to see that, we sort of split up the world in different regions, and for each region we would have about 5 to 8 short stories that are representative. That's saying too much, but really we would be featuring prominent authors in these regions through short stories. So then there
So
was sort of a bit
Luke,
of
may I ask you a quick
serendipity
question?
here. In 2015, I was asked by CU at Boulder whether I wanted to teach a summer school, and I said, "Oh yeah, that's great. I'll just do my short stories project, and can I teach philosophy and literature?" And they said, "Oh no, 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 philosophy and literature. In the summer we can't get enough students for that. Can you teach contemporary social problems?" I said, "Yeah, it's fine. Contemporary social problems." I said, "How about through short stories?" And I said, "Okay, you can do that." So then what I did was I took my short stories and I connected each of the short story with a particular current affairs issue. And that current affairs issue was was presented through articles in newspapers, through blogs, and so on. And that's how the website really came into being. So let me talk a little bit about the structure of it. So we wanted to have global coverage, as I said, about having 5 to 8 short stories per region. We wanted to have short stories that exemplified socially relevant themes, and then connect that to current affairs with popular press articles, with blogs, and so on, and then to end up with a number of questions that would work as conversation starters for the students.
Luke, may I ask you a quick question?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, before you move forward, I'm really interested in this process, partly because you're describing what educators do every day, all the time, which is make instructional choices about the materials that they share with your kids. And I use kids in the broadest of terms, right? So if you and your team chose 5 to 8 short stories, what was the process that you used to identify the 30 short stories that then were whittled down and turned into the 5 to 8? How did you evaluate them? How did your team make those recommendations or come to their final conclusions?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think sort of the first stab at it, right, was that we sort of were interested in short stories that would make us really excited, that like, oh, you gotta read this, this is amazing, and we would discuss it, and they were sort of the kind of short stories that would keep us awake at night, that really would stick with you. Um, and and then in addition, we just threw a whole bunch of short stories on the pile, really about 2 or 3 times as much as what we have right now. And then we got to this point where we said, look, we want to have a balanced representation around the world, right? So, of course, knowing the European tradition a bit better, knowing the North American tradition a bit better, we had too many North American and European stories, so we threw some of those out. And the other thing that we wanted to do was we felt that, the grandparents of the short story, like a Guy de Maupassant or an Anton Chekhov, they should be in there. That was something that we wanted to hang on to. And then there were sort of the great 20th century contemporary writers like Chinua Achebe, like an Isabel Allende, like a Marquez, Gabriel Garcia Marquez. We wanted those to be in there as well. And then thirdly, and that was kind of maybe a little bit of an unorthodox choice, we also wanted to have less well-known, more contemporary authors in there. That was important in order to get sort of contemporary social problems exemplified. But it was also important because I think it gives the students a sense of literature being a living art and something that's tangible, something that they can try their hand on. Yeah. So that's how we whittled down a set of, what shall I say, 60 to 90 stories to about 40-ish. Yeah.
And so it sounds like, though, as you did this, what is sort of a mix of subjectivity as well as, you had some pretty clear guidelines and some intentional metrics, but it does sound like you were looking at this from the lens of a philosopher as opposed to a literary critic or scholar, correct?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true. I think if you pick up a volume on short stories that is really aimed at students in literature, right? You're going to have much more of a splitting up of those short stories according to
Right,
stylistic variants and so
right,
on.
right,
And
right.
these were things that we didn't do. The other thing too that was important was there are a number of amazingly great short stories that are fantastic to read, but the problem with them is that they really don't exemplify social problems very much, right? And that, of
Right.
course, was another criterion that we had. Um, and so yeah, that's how we ended up with what we ended up. It's it's
Yeah.
still sort of a living project in a way, and it would be nice if people would try it and tell me this is working and this isn't working, or have you thought about this particular combination? Um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah, thank you for answering that. And, it is important, I think, to acknowledge how the curation happens. And there's a value by that curation, right? There's a value that a philosopher and a philosophy team put this together. There's a value that you have a Belgian perspective. I mean, and that's why this history of this project, it seems to me, is an important part of seeing the value in the whole project. Thank you.
right, yeah, terrific. Um, so I don't know much about website design. Um, Tried to design my own website one time, didn't look very good. But then I ran into this Chilean web artist, really, Fiorella Lavado, and she was working for a colleague of mine. And she said, "Oh, this is a great project. I'd like to participate." And so the artwork that you see is all by her, and that's quite a. It's kind of funny because when I asked my friends whether they've seen my website, they say, "Oh yeah, the artwork is fantastic," and I kind of want to say, "What about the content?" Right? It's a little bit like your professor saying that your exam really nice handwriting, right? But anyway, I'm proud that it looks as good as it does actually. But that's all due to Fiorella Lavado. You can find her actually on the web with some other project that she has. She's really a fantastic artist. So that's the whole thing. And here is what it looks like. Let me go back one. So when you open it up, this is what you see. Teaching ethics with short stories, and then you can do the stories by region and the stories by theme. Um,
And I'm sorry, I am going to interrupt you one more time,
no
if you
problem
don't
at all.
mind, Luke. Let's go back to this page, and if I'm going to talk for just a moment, if you'll put the website link in the chat box. And I do think that Libby sent out the updated and the correct version. I think you had some links that needed to be corrected in that version. So we're going to be showing you some screenshots. It's not very easy to show live site navigation when we're doing webinars, but this is a site that you can visit, and hopefully you've done so beforehand. And as Professor Bovens walks us through it, you'll be able to understand how to use it more clearly. Thank you.
Yeah, terrific. What I just put in the chat box here is actually the link to Kill a Child.
Got it.
That's one of the stories. And I'm sorry that actually the link used to work a month ago, but then all of a sudden it quit working. but I hope you were able to get to that story through the
Yeah, perfect.
the website, Teaching Ethics with Short Stories. I mean, I sort of laid it out in the letter how to get there. But anyway, I mean, we'll be talking about it in a second.
Thank you.
Yeah, I see one of the people in the chat box here, Jasmine Armenian Ventura, saying really beautiful. So that's I always get a lot of praise for the website for the artist. And I'm the only thing I can do is try to hope to match the content in the level of quality. So terrific. Okay, so you click on by region, and then you get these 6 regions. Now, this is tricky, these regions, okay, because it's not like they're literary traditions or so, so that's not what we're aiming at. The other thing is that there's a lot of choices that you need to make. Where does North Africa end, and where does Sub-Saharan Africa begin? Where are you going to put Sudan, and so on. Another thing that's problematic is you have a lot of migrant authors, like a Junot Diaz. Where do you put Junot Diaz? Should I put him in Latin America, Dominican Republic, or should I put him in North America, where he's actually writing right now? So a lot of choices need to be made, and one can be critical there, like, why did you put that particular story in that region, or is it even justified to make regions like that? But I feel like unless you do something like this, this is what helps us really in regimenting ourselves, that we have a kind of global representation. And of course, there's a lot of holes. We only have about 30 to 40 short stories in the whole collection, and that should get us around the world. I mean, in a way that's laughable, but at least I think, we have a kind of global representation with many holes, but that's why it's a living project, really. Anyway, so then we thought, well, look, but if you're an instructor, it might be the case that you say, look, I just want to see what I can do on gender relations, for instance, or I might want to see what I can do on wartime issues. Or what's even harder is if you take these abstract concepts like empathy or cruelty and so on. But anyway, what we try to do is take our collection of short stories and put it into 16 different boxes, 16 different content boxes or theme boxes. So if you say, what are the stories that involve cruelty, you get about 6 or 7 stories that would fit that particular theme. And we thought that this, there's a lot of judgment calls that come in here, but we thought that this would be helpful for instructors in planning their lessons. So that's that. So you see, there's a we have like luck and irony and poverty, race and ethnicity, rape and prostitution, truth and deception, and so on. All right. Let me tell you something about, the short stories and ethics teaching. Like, why is it good to use short stories in ethics teaching? Kind of get you sold on the project of using this particular tool for your ethics teaching. One thing, of course, that, one thing you could say is, why not read War and Peace? Why not read Middlemarch? That's how we always did it. And what's wrong with doing that? Why should we use short stories? Now, here is one problem, right? That is that students are busy, and they have some fun activities to do, and they have, but they also need to get some entries on their CVs and this and that. And if you're going to assign War and Peace, and the students reach for Cliff's Notes, then you're not a step ahead, because now they really haven't been exposed to literature, right? They just read the summary, and that's all they did. So the hope with short stories is that you will actually get the students to read those stories. And some of them are actually so short, you can read them in the classroom together with them. And that can be very successful, actually. I mean, you could have them each read a paragraph or each read a sentence and so on. So, that's, I think you get students to actually read literature rather than pretend they've read it and looked for cliff notes or Wikipedia or whatever instead, in order to show that they know what's there. But there's more to be said, really, for short stories. This is a Kurt Vonnegut picture. And Kurt Vonnegut had some interesting things to say about short stories. He started off actually as a short story writer, and he talks about an age before the internet and an age before TV, when families would subscribe to various literary magazines. And there were a lot of literary magazines around. And if you were an aspiring young writer, what you would do is, not as today, we moved to New York in order to write the great American novel, right? No, you would just write your little short stories and you would try them out on these literary magazines. And you would start on the bottom and work your way up, in more and more prestigious literary magazines. And if it didn't work, well, then maybe you shouldn't give up your day job, right? So you could kind of try your hand on this art and try to become better and better at it. And Vonnegut actually says about his early short stories that they're not very good. He said, I was just learning my trade, really, when I was putting these things into these literary magazines. And then the other thing that was happening was that when these literary magazines would arrive in families, people would try to get their hands on them, and they would discuss them over dinner. And so, it was really kind of a conversation piece. These short stories were a conversation piece. And that's the sort of richness, really, that the short story brought. That's why it's written the way it is. So let's say something here about what makes these short stories in a way different from reading novels. Um, in a novel, I think, it's kind of like taking a warm bath. You sort of lose yourself in it, and you just lay there for hours and hours or whatever. Whereas a short story is a bit like a quick shower. You just kind of go in and out, and that's that, right? Um, and that makes short stories interesting for moral conversation, because you start in the middle of the action, you leave in the middle of the action. And there is like, what's the background? What is the protagonist going to do? All kinds of questions remain open. They're sort of open-ended on both sides. They're open-ended as to where does this all come from and where is it all going to go to. But that makes it for a great medium for conversation. Yeah. There's a lot to be filled in by the reader, actually, when it comes to the short story. Here is a quote from Vonnegut about 8 basics of creative writing. He says, be a sadist. No matter how sweet and innocent your leading characters are, make awful things happen to them in order that the reader may see what they are made of. And you got that in the short story. That is, your ordinary people are your protagonists, and they placed in these morally challenging situations, and what are they going to do? And that kind of open-endedness makes it very rich and interesting for discussion. So why is it good for the students to work with these short stories? I think one of the things that's important is that a student is able to recognize and verbalize a moral issue when it stares them in the face. And, of course, it's interesting that they can do so in real life, but, that's always tricky to bring real life to the classroom. But in the short story, you can do sort of the second best thing. Yeah. And it may also be a route towards bringing personal experiences into the classroom. The students learn how to lay out the position. What do they think the protagonist should do or should have done? And they argue for that position with each other. Many of these short stories that we've chosen involve issues of race, ethnicity, gender, and so on, sensitive issues. I think the students learn how to engage in a respectful dialogue and navigate cultural sensitivities. So
So
for
it
all
it
these
almost
reasons, I think the
sounds
material is nice to work with high school students. You may not like all the stories, but I think you like some of them.
That's a great point, Luke. And it sounds like you're suggesting too that just the act of engaging with these stories and then discussing them as training wheels for these much more complicated life experiences, it does lead to civil discourse, right? It allows us a sort of a safe passage to navigate these complexities and do so in a respectful way.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think sometimes, I haven't done this too much in the questions that I phrased. Sometimes maybe somewhat, but one can easily add questions where you prompt the students to bring in personal experiences, that relate to the material that is presented in the stories. Yeah. All right. Good. Let's take a look at yeah, that's the choice of the short stories. We talked about that. So now comes just an example. I think if you going to look at at one story, just sort of to get into it, I like the Stig Dagerman story a lot. It's a Swedish story right after World War II, to kill a child. And basically, the idea was that the Swedish National Society for Road Safety just commissioned a short story in order to improve safety on the roads. And it's kind of like a social advertisement campaign. And it's kind of funny that you know, one of the most amazing short stories actually that come out of Sweden, was just a response by Stig Dagerman, to a call from the Swedish National Society for Road Safety, to put a story together that would induce people to slow down and pay more attention on the road. So the story is about a couple that's driving to the seaside, and then at the same time, what's happening is that you see a household where a kid is being told, oh, everything is on the table except for the sugar. Do you want to run to the neighbor in order to pick up a couple of cubes of sugar? But hurry up because we really have to get going here. And of course, you see what's going to happen. As the story progresses, the car gets closer to the village, the kid goes outside, and the car runs over the kid, and the kid is killed. Um, and and then you get this whole sort of psychology of, you know, what how does a person deal with having accidentally killed another person? Yeah. And I find it very moving story. I mean, every time I read it, it just moves me to tears. Um, and and then I found in the New Yorker a very interesting piece, which is called "The Sorrow and the Shame of the Accidental Killer." And basically, what the story does, it interviews a number of people who have accidentally caused deaths, mostly road accidents, um, and it explores the theme through various artistic forms. Yeah, there's a couple of references to movies that explore this theme, and then it also goes into the philosophy. In philosophy, this is called the problem of moral luck. That is, two people do exactly the same thing. Yeah, one is lucky, and the kid is just an inch away from the car. The other one runs over the kid. In a way, their moral culpability is exactly the same, but one is skilled and the other one has not. And yet it strikes these people in a very different way. And so this whole problem of how culpable are you, when it's the case that in one case bad things happens due to the things you did, in another case you got off scot-free. Yeah, is there a difference in your culpability, your responsibility, how you should deal with this, and so on? And that's kind of the puzzle of moral luck. And this article goes through interviewing people who've gone through the experience. It talks about literary and artistic expressions of it, and it talks about what the philosophers have to say about it. And I think it's interesting to put the New Yorker piece together with the Dag Stegerman case. I really sort of, encourage you to read both of them and to think to yourself, can I do something with this in the classroom? And that's just one example. Oh, great. Somebody here says could definitely be used with high school students in the chat box. Thank you very much. Yeah. It gives us a problem. Chekhov says it gives us a problem to struggle with. Also, Carl Rosen, thank you very much. And Jacqueline Donaldson for the previous contribution. Thank you. Okay. So here are the student questions that I came up with. Does it work as a piece of social advertisement? Something might have worked there because I think Sweden is the country with, I think they had like 0 bicycle deaths in a particular year, which is amazing for a country of what I think is 7 or 8 million people, 0 bicycle deaths. So they have, very good records for road safety. I'm not saying it's due to the story, but anyway. Then there is a question of blame. Yeah, there is a kind of carefreeness about the driver. The kid is being told to hurry. Who is to blame here, and so on. Then one of the things that is really being stressed in this New Yorker article is that there are self-help groups for all kinds of psychological problems, but the accidental killer, there are no self-help groups for the accidental killer. And the person who is sort of the main character being interviewed here actually has put together a website called Accidental Impacts, in which people discuss the issue of having accidentally caused the death. And it's actually a very nice website to look at because people tell you their stories and how they reacted and everything. So Accidental Impacts, if you just Google it, you'll find it. But she says, I'm alone with my website. There is no other support network for people who've gone through this. The stories that you hear from the various people in this article, in some cases, it's like, the kid jumped in front of the car and there was nothing I possibly could have done. In other cases, they say, well, I was distracted and I was changing the station on my radio, and that's when it happened. And so there's always sort of this question of, different levels of culpability. And then one can ask the question, what is an appropriate response? I think if you're hyper rational about it and you say, look, there was nothing that I could have done, and you just walk away as if nothing happened, as if it was just a story that you read in the newspaper that happened on the other side of the world, we would look down on a person like that. We feel like some kind of moral regret is in place. You have a certain responsibility to offer condolences to the victims and so on. Why do you have that responsibility? There was nothing you could do about it. So that whole sort of question of what is the appropriate response? Yeah, some kind of moral regret seems to be the appropriate response. But to have your life marred by guilt and shame, that does not seem like an appropriate response. And yet that's how many people do respond. Why do they respond like that? And I think there's a rich set of material here to discuss these questions.
Luke, may I ask you a question?
Yeah.
As you describe this, this seems like really an ideal story for pre-collegiate students, for high school, middle grades, maybe even elementary students to really begin to ask themselves, not because in the very extreme case of causing the death of another that many, if any, of these students would be in that position, but lots and lots and lots of kids do things and they don't intend the consequences that occur, right? So something happens, it's all fun and games till someone loses an eye, and they do something with no intention of causing harm or injuring or destroying or breaking or whatever. And young kids, they really have to ask themselves these questions. And so I don't know that the scale is the same or the intention, the intensity when you cause someone's death, but this story seems like it would fit really well with many of the questions that kids ask themselves as they go through life.
Right. Yeah. I think there's so many times in life where you hear that, somebody did bring about horrendous consequences. People were killed, whatever, this and that. And you say, what happened? And there was sort of an element of lack of responsibility to what they did, right? But in so many instances, we look back on our own lives and we say, oh man, we could all have been there, right? We also have taken some stupid risks, made some stupid decisions, but most of us are lucky that nothing happens as a consequence. And I think young children see that as well.
Yeah.
That, in their act of blaming other kids, they should ask themselves the question, could I not have been in the same boat? Yeah.
Right.
I think it
Well,
makes them into better people to learn how to
yeah.
ask that question. I think we ask that question too little. And so that's definitely something that will appeal, I think, to young children, when they are asked. I mean, the opposite holds true too for praise, right? I mean, sometimes two people put exactly the same effort into something, do exactly the same thing, but in one case it takes off and the other case it doesn't. Who do we praise, right? So the question of praise and blame, they sort of mirror images in a way. I see
That's
somebody
true.
made a reference to the lottery, Shirley Jackson's Lottery. That's a story. That's Renee LaRue here I see. That's a story actually that I have included in in the collection. Um, it's interesting actually because when I was working with those students, sometimes we didn't agree. There were stories that they liked and I got outvoted, and there were stories that I liked and I got outvoted, and so on. Um, and we talked for a long time about the Shirley Jackson story. But take a look at it and to all of you and see whether you like it.
I've got one more question for you, Professor, and that is, as we stay on this notion of of, of accidental guilt and shame, you've put together a collection of stories that address many different themes. In your experience, do different literary traditions or cultures address these ethical questions differently? In other words, is this same sort of accidental unintended consequence, do we respond to it the same in the Western tradition as they do in Latin America or they might in Asia? So do you see any differences based on the geography that you've already outlined?
Sometimes there are issues that come up in the classroom that are like that sort of chime with that. Like um, I remember a Latin American student we were reading Marquez stories, and he was sort of saying, "Oh, but you got to understand, the machismo in our culture and this and that, right?" I don't want to don't want to stereotype, make generalizations, but just the general issue here is that when you're working with students who often come from various places in the world, they make you see things in these stories by bringing in their own culture. Their sensitivity to honor, for instance, which may be different from the Western versus the Asian world. Gender relations, which are different in different parts of the world. And the students will come in um, with an explanation or different takes on these stories that are often very interesting. And there you see, cultural relativity come into play. And that can often be very instructive. Also, what you see sometimes is that the students get engaged because they will search for the article in the original language. Yeah. Um, and there's a story from China in the collection, and I had a number of Chinese students who were, picking up the story in the original language, and they were immediately like, oh, but this particular line is not right. Here is a particular concept in Chinese culture, which is this and that, and this is what that word means, and it's not translated the right way. So that, there's a lot of excitement that
Yeah,
comes in.
yeah, great.
So
Thank you for expanding on that.
yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah. actually, this is interesting. So somebody, Jonathan Spear here, talks about explore systems and responses which might be restorative, penitent, punitive, retributive. I included a story by Borges, and it's called Emma Zuns. And Emma Zuns is about somebody taking revenge. And I connected that actually with a newspaper article about to what extent you need vengeance in a justice system. What element of vengeance do you need to have in a justice system that is, give a voice to the victim, and not just a voice, but also a kind of power to the victim in how the offender should be treated. And I think the story of Borges and Mazuns is just a really, really nice exploration of that idea. Yeah, good. Question 4, right, yeah. Drawing significant, Carl Rosen here says, drawing significant distinction seems essential to moral reasoning. Yes, yes, yes. So, the various people interviewed, George Weller actually is a person who who pushed the accelerator instead of the brake. He was an 86-year-old, pushed the accelerator instead of the brake and killed 10 people in a market in California. Um, and 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 the interesting thing is that people were just outraged about this, right? And thought he was highly culpable. And Marion Gray is really the main person who's interviewed in this article in the New Yorker. And she says, as a young person, she killed a child accidentally. And she responds actually by going on National Public Radio, defending George Weller and say, look, this is a terrible accident, but I'm sure he didn't push the accelerator intentionally. So I feel for George Weller. Yeah. But still, you could, in the Marion Gray case, you could say it's almost like a kid that jumped in front of the car. Yeah. Whereas in the George Weller case, you say, man, you pushed the accelerator. What were you doing? Right. So the question of kind of culpability makes for good discussion here. He didn't push the accelerator accidentally, but still he did something which caused this horrendous suffering. Whereas in the Marion Gray case, it's almost like the kid just jumped in front of the car, in as much as you hear from the story. So these are the kind of things that are interesting to discuss. Okay?
Sounds good. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, some questions here. To the audience, does the combination of the short story, the article, and the questions for discussion work well, in your opinion? If you had a chance maybe to look at both of these stories, are the questions pitched at the right level? Would they help teachers in starting discussion in the classroom? I sort of see this in a very ecumenical way. That is, some people might say, look, I don't care about these newspaper articles. I just want to teach literature to the kids, and I got my own questions. Other people may say, oh, I don't care about the short stories, but this is a really nice collection of ethical problems raised in articles. Great, every teacher is different, right? So this is just suggestive as far as I'm concerned, but I'm kind of wondering what you say. Okay,
Let's take a
somebody
minute.
uses sci-fi and fantasy in class. Yeah. There's actually a website. Let me see that I can find it. By Eric Switchcable, and he collects sci-fi stories that can be used in philosophy. Let's see that I can find it.
While you're searching for that, Professor, I'll note that in conversations I have with philosophers when they're fellows at the center, I'm often told that at the university level, many, if not most, of the philosophy majors that they work with find an entry point to philosophy in literature in high school. And so the connection between the literary tradition and philosophy, particularly in the post-secondary world, is pretty strong, it seems.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Just a second here. I've never been good at multitasking, and this particular medium does ask for some multitasking.
There it is.
Um, so I put that in. Here's another send, and I'm wondering, did I? Yeah. 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 Right. Okay. Good. So, Andy, can you ask me again what you just asked?
Well, I was just commenting as you were typing in. I was noting that I often hear from philosophers at the center when they're fellows that it's literature class that really sort of introduces kids, high school students, to philosophy and brings them in and gives them some interest at the college level. You know, there aren't too many pure philosophy courses taught at the high school level, but there are ways to embed that in the literature as you're doing tonight.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
there does seem to be a very direct line between the two.
Yeah. Um, I came from um, in Belgium, we still have the tradition of teaching Latin and Greek. And I spend about 80% of my time actually engaged with literature. Um, and we never had a philosophy course, um, but in a way, I learned so much philosophy through literature, and also things like sort of the aspects of philosophy that deal with fallacies and argumentation and patterns of argumentation. Um, we learned about that through reading Cicero's defenses in court, um, and um, and so I think also humanities courses largely contribute to this. The students learn philosophy through reading humanities texts, so that's interesting. Oh, here
Mhm.
is an interesting comment to the ones who walk away from Omelas, the Ursula Le Guin piece. You know, that actually was a piece that for the longest time was in the running. Um, I'm always a little bit hesitant about pieces that are very intentionally philosophical. I sort of like literature to be literature without even thinking about the philosophy, but it's actually very deep philosophically. And sometimes I feel like that Ursula Le Guin piece is so intentionally about utilitarianism that I'm a little bit hesitant to put it in. But it's a great piece. It's a great piece, but it's one of these things that I discussed with my students: are we going to put this in or not? Um, and it would be good to think too about maybe that piece really should go in, but then I need to have a nice a newspaper article that exemplifies a problem that is raised by that short story, and I sort of haven't been able to put these things together.
One thing I'm struck
Yeah, that's
by,
for younger
and
students. Okay, yeah, seventh
yeah,
grade here. So somebody says I'm teaching seventh grade. When I was trying to put this collection together, I was kind of thinking about, juniors and seniors in high school. So it's not, I can think of a number of pieces even that I left out that would have worked for a younger audience, but you kind of have to make choices. And some pieces might work for seventh grade, but most of them are really geared towards juniors and seniors.
mm. Professor, let me ask you this question. I've heard you mention now several times that you had to make the choice that one had to go, or you have to make choices. Why did you limit the number? Why have 5 to 8 or 6 to 9? Why not have every story that fits these categories?
Yeah, I tell you, Andy, this is really a labor of love. It's incredibly time consuming to put these things together, um,
Mm,
and
okay.
um, and so to find something where you feel like I feel good about this short story, I feel good about the connection between the short story and the newspaper article or the blog or whatever, and I feel good about my questions. To have it all chime, there's a lot of work that goes into it. And and that's why you sometimes start dropping things. You say, yeah, it's a great story, but the connection with the newspaper article is really flimsy. Can I do better? I can't do better. Okay, well, maybe the story should go then. So I'm sort of happy that at the end of the day, I have about 40 stories where I feel like I kind of feel good about the whole collection. I mean, about, the whole unit for that story. Um, and then also the other thing is that, we all come from different backgrounds. And of course, my own background is more in Western literature. So I constantly start seeing more articles that I could use from Europe and North America. Yeah. And that's just because of my own background. But I really would like to keep the balance. So if I knew my Southeast Asian literature a little bit better, I could pump it up on that side, and then I could pump it up for Europe and North America too. But I kind of like to keep the balance. Make
Yep.
sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense. Thank you.
It is a reference to my own, limitations here, but we try to do the best we can. Oh, that's really interesting. So the Le Guin utilitarianism, it does get kids really arguing, says Carl Rosen. I should maybe rethink it. But Carl, if you find a good way to connect it to contemporary issues, and a good way to connect it to a newspaper article, a blog, or something like that, maybe we should try to rethink it and include it. Okay, thanks for, I teach a class here, Carol Sobetzer. I teach a class called Philosophy Through Literature. These are great resources for me. Thank you very much.
There are other thoughts or
Okay,
questions that you'd
somebody
like to
enjoys the
ask?
visual images.
Yeah.
That's all Fiorella Levado. Question 1, I like question 1. Let me take a look. Oh yeah, is it effective as a piece of social advertisement? I was rereading it again this morning, and I'm living in Boulder at the moment. There's so many bikers, Boulder, Colorado. There's so many bikers here, and you got to be so attentive in the car because it's so easy, because the bikes come from all kinds of directions. And as I got to the end of the story, I was like, I'm going to try to minimize my car usage here, because it just always gets to me, this story. Anyway, so effective as a piece of social advertisement, right? All right, shall we move on, and shall I tell you a little bit about my problem of reaching an audience?
That sounds great. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So here is my first idea. Yeah, naive as it was, but I thought, why don't we do this? We put these stories together. We put these newspaper articles together. We put it all behind a password. We put it all on the web. And then what we do is we go to the authors, their agents, the publishers, the newspapers, and so on. And we say, hey, we got this project here. What would it cost in order to have copyright cleared on this? Yeah. So we would get a response to that. We would take a look and see what our copyright costs were. Then we would knock on the door of a donor, a philanthropist, a foundation, and we say, look at the project. This would be a really good project, great resource, and this and that. Do you feel like supporting it? For $10,000, we can get this going. And off it goes. Everybody is paid, copyright cleared, done with, and off it goes as an open resource. That was my dream. That was a complete mistake. What happens when you write to authors, agents, publishers? I basically got a response from one of them. And that was because I had a bit of a personal connection. All the other ones don't even bother replying to this request. From the one who did reply, I sort of started understanding why nobody was replying. And they basically said, look, there is no model for publishing things on the web. If you want to put out a book, then we can do it. But publishing things on the web, forget it. Newspaper articles, that was even more of a disaster. Basically, the newspapers say, look, don't steal stuff from us, but don't ask us questions about copyright because we don't know. So, I just couldn't get anywhere with this. And the project even stalled for a long time because of the fact that I couldn't get anywhere with my copyright clearance. So that was that. That was take one. Yeah. Hopeless. All right. Here comes take two. So somebody said, well, there's these places like Xanadu, the publishing companies, and they really work for educators and so on, and they clear copyright for you, and that's where you should go. So I knocked on their door, I had a chat with them, and basically they say this: look, clearing copyright is going to cost you $5,000 to $10,000 just what you pay to us. Yeah, what it's going to cost in the way of what you got to pay to the authors and the publishers and this and that we don't know. But just we clear it for $5,000 to $10,000. I said, okay, well, that's a lot of money. Then they said, well, look, the way it works is that if you have this particular project and you can get, North Carolina educators excited about this and they want to pick it up as the curriculum for a particular class in high school, and we know we're going to sell $10,000, we know we're going to sell to 10,000 students, then we can start printing for you. And that's the way it works. I said, so I have to give you an audience. And they said, yeah, you have to give us an audience. If you say we need 10,000 copies for this or that, we will clear copyright, we will set costing, and we will do all this for you. I said, well, I don't have an audience for you. That's not how this works. So again, hopeless, yeah, equally hopeless. So frankly, then I got a little bit sick of it. And I said, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to post a short story in case there are no copyright problems. Yeah, that's another thing. I mean, figuring out whether something is still under copyright restriction is very difficult, and it's dependent on region and this and that. Basically, if the author and the translator have been dead for more than 70 years, then you're safe. You can put it up on the web. Yeah. So for those stories, I just put them up straight on the web. The other ones, I found many places on the web where the story was available. So I linked to it. Sometimes it's Google books, sometimes it's literary blogs, and so on. So I just made links to them. Now, of course, links are tricky because they go in and out of existence. But I felt like that's the best I could do. We checked all the links, and sometimes it's a little bit messy. They're archives, sometimes they're book clubs, sometimes they have to pay for and this and that, but I try to give the best accessibility for each of the stories. Newspaper articles, there you run into the paywall problem. So if you're just going to read 5 pieces from the New Yorker, it's fine. If you want to read more, well, you can ask the students to pay for it, but it's a lot of newspapers, it's a lot of monthlies and so on, so it's a lot of money. Students are not going to pay for this. So, you can use multiple browsers. There's all kinds of tricks and this and that to get around it. I tell the students, look, you open it up one time, you copy it in Word, and that's what you work with. Yeah, I think that's fair. That's fair, okay? If you're going to read it in 5 installments, you don't have to consider this as 5 openings, yeah? So anyway, so that's what I did. I put the whole website up as you see it right now. I know that the accessibility to the stories and with the paywall problem isn't always great, but it is absolutely the best I can do. We've been very creative in trying to find links to multiple places on the web where the story is available. But that's just the best we can do right now. So that's our take 3. Now for take 4, the last take. So as I put this up and took the password off, which was just in October, I took the password off. 2 weeks later, I get a response. I get a contact, actually. I mean, they contact me out of the blue. Oxford University Press says, we're interested in the project. Would you like to teach it? Would you like to publish it as a book or an ebook? And, it has to go through reviewers and this and that. And, at that point, of course, I started thinking to myself, well, the pro is that they give you an audience, right? Right now, I have about 20 people per day that look at this. Whether, how they look at it, whether they're going to use it, I don't know. But, it's not like this is this is being picked up by classrooms around the world and so on, right? But I feel that with Oxford University Press teaching, it's actually textbooks for teaching in the US, I could get a much greater outreach. The con, of course, is that it will no longer be free. I'm not interested in making any money on this. So, I want to keep the cost as low as possible. It's out for review right now. And what I'm hoping is that we could, put together something like this as a textbook through Oxford University Press. And I think if we could keep the costs low, maybe it's the case that we could make it accessible through libraries, where libraries pay a certain amount and the students get free access to it as a kind of ebook. That's kind of what I'm hoping to be able to do. But I think given the work that I've put in it, I'd like to see uptake. And I think Oxford University Press, if they're willing to go ahead with it, because it's currently under review, we'll see how it goes. That would be something that I'd be interested in. I might have to take it down on the website then. We'll see how it goes. I really don't know. Yeah. So anyway, let me ask you a couple of final questions here. And then we can have a discussion here on the chat box, right? So other combinations, there was already an Ursula Le Guin story that was being suggested. Are there certain topics where you feel like, young people are not going to be interested in this? Are there certain topics where you feel like you really should include something like that? Sometimes I get a bit nervous about some of the topics for juniors and seniors in high school. Are there topics that are problematic? Like there's a Hemingway on abortion in there. Is that problematic for high schools? Sometimes the standards are different for high schools than for, first and second year college, where this material could also be used. Should there be different versions? Do you have other ideas for added value? They always talk about what added value do you have? Basically, what I have right now as added value is I put things together and I have questions. Are there other ideas for added value? So, this is interesting. So Hemingway's Hills Like White Elephants, which is about abortion, engages high school students every single time, says Teresa Lawler. So, that's one of the, I'm sort of questioning, is it okay to use this in high school? So anyway, I'm sort of awaiting your responses on the chat box.
Yeah, so Jonathan offers.
It might be helpful to have samples of what students have written. I have used it in the classroom, and students write various reviews of the short stories. Some of them are interested in writing short stories themselves. And that's been interesting. That's been an interesting project. Yeah, let me see whether I missed any questions.
Here's a question coming through from Rachel. Joel is sitting next to her. Perhaps he's typing. Rachel asked, perhaps it's too current, but do any stories exist that incorporate the ethics of social media? Certainly something that students are passionate about.
Yes. No, I don't have it. It's an interesting question because at one point I was teaching this and I used Huno Diaz's story Israel, which is about bullying. And then I connected that with a study of bullying in social media. And I felt like the connection wasn't ideal. So that's not how it's on the website right now. I just used it in the class like that. Students were very interested in talking about bullying in social media, but I didn't have any good story about social media. So it would be great to have that.
But at the same time, do you have stories that explore the ethical and philosophical choices around constant oversharing or lack of privacy, or are there other ways to approach that topic even if there's not literally a story about social media?
Yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting. Let me sort of take a quick look. There is the Japanese story that was the inspiration of Rashomon. It's called In a Grove, and it's by Ryonosuke Akutagawa. It's an old story, actually. It's from beginning of the 20th century, and that is a story of a sexual encounter being told from 5 or 6 different perspectives. So in that sense, I think it's interesting, talking about people having different views on an event, and the kind of disagreement that comes with that. But no, if there's any kind of recommendation on social media issues, that would be terrific, because I'm sort of quickly looking through the stories here just to remind myself, but I just have nothing, and that's definitely something that young people would be excited about.
Yeah, I want to point out what Jasmine
there's so
says.
many things coming in here.
Yeah.
And I just don't want to skip things. Why don't you look too, and then see where we go with it. Okay, let me take a look at the last one. Just, feel free to repeat the question if I don't get to it. Cool, yeah, I'm really excited potential tonight. Thank you very much. Yeah. Social media. Yeah. Okay. So the paid version, it is a tricky thing. Yeah, I would not use it, says Susan Amper. Look, I signed a pledge too in UNC at Chapel Hill saying that I want to keep the cost of textbooks to a minimum for the students. So the only thing I can say is that, if we would go to an OUP textbook, I'm going to fight hard. I'm going to fight hard in order to keep the costs low. And if that means, copyright being $0 for me, I am perfectly fine with that. I have no interest in making money on this. But that's, I think, the best that I can say. Maybe I should get an agent who can help me with this. Oh yeah, so the National High School Ethics Bowl, I was just actually judging for them. And they write their own problem cases. It's a very interesting project. So you get basically a story that is written up by often PhD students in philosophy, and then the high school students. It always is some kind of moral quandary. Like I remember there was one about buying a speech from a speechwriter in order to do that speech at a wedding or something. Is that permissible or not, right? So stuff like that. And so you get then these high school students to come and debate this, right? And it's a really great project. And they're kind of short stories in a way. What I like about this project is that it also gives the students, access to this great literature. The grief of divorce and loneliness. Yeah. Skip depending on the maturity. Yeah, okay. For every male author, a female author, equal representation. I think I'm not doing too bad on that. We should do a count. But I think that they sort of naturally come out. I'm not going to say 50-50, but I might not be too far away from it. And if you add to that, of course, the gender balance amongst journalists, you get kind of the same story. Also, of course, it would be nice to have representation of minorities, and of course, doing this global project, right? You have a lot of non-Caucasian writers in the picture, but we try to do the best we can there. So for Jasmine, Amelia, and Ventura, have you actually done a count of male versus female? It'd be interesting to see how well I do there. Yes, indeed, younger students. Let me give you let me give you a reference that I like. Let me see that I can find it for younger students. So there is Peter Worley. He is an English philosopher, and he has this project of the if machine. Don't know whether you've seen this, but it is wonderful material. And when I was teaching in London School of Economics, we would do in the weekends we would have seminars of where he would come and speak about how to teach students, how to teach our PhD students to teach philosophy in grade school. And he uses the if machine, philosophical inquiry in the classroom, for this purpose. And that's a wonderful resource. And the name is actually Peter Worley. And if you Google him, you'll find other resources as well. Yeah, Stories on Transgender Identity, Just Different by Malika Moustadraf from Morocco is very, very nice on transgender rights. I connected it to a New York Times article, 18 transgender killings this year raise fears of an epidemic. So take a look at that. Malika Moustadraf, the first entry under North Africa and the Middle East.
Luc, we're almost out of time, and it seems like you've been able to get through most of the questions here. I'd actually like to end our session with one final question to you, and that is, you've taken a lot of suggestions tonight. You've asked a lot about the environment of high school students and younger students. Let me ask you a little bit about your own teaching. When students come to you and they're sitting in your course, your class at UNC Chapel Hill, in many cases, these are the kids that our audience tonight taught a year, 2, 3 years ago. What kinds of interests do they have? What kinds of questions do you hear them raising as they consider these kinds of ethical dilemmas?
Yeah, I mean, there are things that work particularly well on students. I mean, I remember like the session on bullying, as I said, bullying in social media. That was a session that worked really, really well. You see, that's something that's on their minds. I also teach in connection with bullying a piece that's called Generation Snowflake. How we train our kids to be censorious crybabies. Okay, so that's sort of the perspective of a person who says, we're putting too much cotton balls around these young students, right? They're way too sensitive, and they get to talk about these issues.
Yeah.
I remember another conversation that was really exciting was I started off with a piece by Nuruddin Farah, who is a Somalian author, The Start of the Affair, and it's all about whether sexual relations are consensual or not. Yeah, and I pair that up with a piece on sugar daddies. Yeah, the sugar daddies, that's older men who pay young college students in order to go on trips with them. Yeah, you can see where that goes. And so that was made for a very lively discussion. It's a bit like one of the people in the one of the respondents here said, I think you can make topics relevant. It just depends on how you present it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So finding an angle that will work for students, that will get them engaged, is always a challenging thing.
Luc, I
And
want to thank you for your thoughts tonight. That's really, I think, a nice place to end. It's finding that hook, finding that anchor, but also I think it's the curated set of resources that you've provided as a professional philosopher that can help unlock many of those themes and topics. Luc Bovens, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
thank you very much. And if anybody has suggestions or ideas, feel free to. You'll find my email on the UNC Philosophy, UNC at Chapel Hill Philosophy website, and feel free to write me. I'm always looking for new ideas, and I promise you that I will write back, and I would love to hear from you. So thank you very much for being part of this.
Thank you again. And Thank you everyone for joining us tonight in the session. We appreciate you spending some time after work with us. Please do keep in touch with the National Humanities Center through our social media, our website, our Twitter handle, and our Facebook page are great ways to keep updated on current and upcoming events, any changes we might have, and other opportunities for you to work with lead scholars like Luc Bovens. I hope to see all of you at our next session 2 days from now, Thursday, March the 12th. We'll be back on schedule and working with Kevin Cruz. Kevin is a professor of history at Princeton University. He's also an extremely active historian on Twitter. He believes that it's his role and professional humanists and academics who have a lot of knowledge on certain topics that it's incumbent upon them to comment on disinformation and through social media try to maintain an accurate narrative to many of the questions that come up. Hope you can join us then. In a moment, I'm going to open up our evening poll and evaluation. Once you've completed that, you'll be able to download your certificate. I hope you have a wonderful day at school tomorrow, and stay safe, please, in the coronavirus epidemic. And we hope to see you again at our next Humanities in Class webinar series. Good night, everyone.